I can. No, I would love to test this, but I'm sure that if I write an article, which will be complete BS, and I say that it's an experiment where I interviewed aliens and I compared the attitudes of
You think it'll
aliens
be
from
accepted?
Mars and Venus. I don't know. I'm not sure anybody will read it.
You think it'll pass?
I think so. They'll say, "Give us $200," and wow, it was great, great article.
So, Billy, it's great to be here with you.
Thank you for coming.
It's my pleasure. Yeah, I'm here at your home, and it's very nice coffee.
Enjoy it. Well, it's my second cup of coffee today.
Is it really?
If I don't have three, I'm quite sleepy.
Gosh, that's wow. And how much sugar are you putting in there?
Well, I can't disclose that after last week's interview.
Yeah, so
But it'll just be between of us, just one.
There you go. Just the one. Just the one. You're weaning off slowly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so we're here at your place, and I just wanted to ask you, what do you think of all of the protests? Because right now, in the judicial reform, I think that's the hot topic on everybody's mind. And as somebody with a background in consumer economics and behavior, what's your hot take on all this?
Well, besides the fact that it prevents me from enjoying Tel Aviv Saturday evening because roads are blocked.
Isn't that the truth?
Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be making that much of a difference. I mean, the government doesn't seem to be moving from its position, pursuing these reforms. Unfortunately, if you read the newspapers on a daily basis, you can see that there are more and more companies that are withdrawing their money from Israel, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of shekels. Even one company, I think it was yesterday, I read in the newspaper that offered its employees here, a high-tech company, offered its employees to relocate abroad. So it means that even, let's say that tomorrow the government says, okay, we're not going to pursue this reform. Which is unlikely. Still, damage has been done. Hundreds of millions of shekels have been withdrawn. People are going to relocate, and these people are likely to remain abroad for many, many years, and maybe not even come back. And we must forget that 25% of the government's income comes from taxing high-tech employees, and that's a lot of money. And
That's
GDP, yes, and a huge significant of GDP is accounted for the activities of the high-tech sector. And 10% of all Israelis work in high-tech companies. So we're talking about 400,000 Israelis who might lose their jobs if they choose not to relocate in case of, the high-tech company.
Just because the company won't be here anymore.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I'm afraid that the economic implications are going to be severe, not only because high-tech companies are leaving or threatening to leave or maybe downsize here in the country. It's because also the credit rating, every country has a credit rating.
Right.
And the higher the credit rating, the lower the interest rate the government pays for the money it borrows. Right now, the Israeli rating is pretty good, but it might be lowered. And if it's lowered, it means that the government will pay more interest for the money it borrows, and this will be, passed down to us, the citizens. So we might pay for this by way of higher taxes or higher government fees.
So are you expecting not just a brain drain, but really just a loss of olim, of immigrants, of citizens in general, and how, because that's a cascading issue.
Yeah. So I think that first of all, I follow these developments closely, and there is a significant lower number, a smaller number of olim coming to the country, not directly because of this judicial reform that is planned, but because the cost of living is so high. And if they pursue this judicial reform, obviously prices will be even higher because there'll be less money coming into the country, and the government will have to fill its coffers somehow, and obviously will be from taxing us. That's one thing. The other thing that is affecting has potential effect on the economic situation is the fact that the government is really right. I mean, it's nowhere in the center. And you can see that the relationship with the Arab world is destabilized now. And this might
like
also
over the judicial reform,
because of the ideology
internally in the
because of settlements, building more settlements, etc.
Mm.
So I think all of the achievements that have been, the things that we have achieved with the Arab world, the Abraham Accords, are threatened, and I think this gave a big boost to the economy, and probably brought closer, some kind of a broader recognition of Israel by the Arab world, and I think all of this is really being, put into danger.
Have you heard? Because you just mentioned the Abraham Accords, and so I know that we have obviously a lot of international development that has begun with them. Is that also being threatened right now by the judicial reform? Have you heard them say anything about that?
I haven't heard anything, but I assume that there will be greater pressure on the countries who have signed the Abraham Accord due to the escalating situation in the West Bank, and we can see that because of the change in policy ideology regarding the peace process, if you can call it a peace process with Palestinians, there is a significant increase in terrorist attacks. We've witnessed one last night in Tel Aviv, and obviously this will also have economic repercussions because companies do not want to invest in a country that is not stable politically, financially, and it can also deter tourists. We're going into the summer season very soon, where we expect a lot of tourists to come into the country, and if there are terrorist attacks, especially in central places like Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, this will certainly deter tourists from coming into the country. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, we had a peak of about 4.2 million tourists coming in. And I was expecting that to return and even increase because of, there's no more pandemic, or at least it's not taken so seriously as it has been in the past. It's today COVID-19 is related to as having the flu, the common flu, right? So I was expecting tourism to pick up. So it's just having a very wide repercussions, whether directly or indirectly.
All right. Now, I don't know. Are you seeing that in terms of what do your students think? What do they think on campus? Because I know the protests obviously have become enormous, and a lot of people are quite concerned about that as well. How's that affecting in the classroom?
Well, I don't bring these things up in the classroom because I'm not supposed to be talking about politics.
But I know as well as you do as a teacher that, students, when they're preoccupied with something, be it, if a kid's hungry, when they come to class, then he doesn't care about consumer economics. You know what I mean? It's certain basic needs need to be met. And so if they're concerned over this and they're constantly thinking hey, what's my future in this country, does that bleed in?
I haven't had direct conversations with my students, but I can tell you that I do sense concern. You can see it in their attitudes. They're pretty tense. Their minds seem to be in certain cases elsewhere. Look, if you look at the young generation, the average age of my student, or the average student in Israel is about 23, 24 years of age. That's the average. And when they come into the academia and they say, well, I'm going to put in 3 years of my life into studying, what are my prospects? I think that the Israeli dream is to be employed by the high-tech industry. Well, it's a dream job. And I think that with these reforms, the industry is really being threatened. So these students, one of the things that probably is going through their minds is, where am I going to work?
Right. So
the best paying, exactly, the best paying jobs are in the high-tech industry. My department trains students to become high-tech managers, product managers, brand managers, but to work in the high-tech industry, technological marketing. And if you look at today's situation in general, the salaries, even the starting salary, is pretty high. And after 2 or 3 years of experience, or 4 years of experience, you can reach, I don't know, probably around 20,000, which is even more than some professors earn in the country. So it's quite promising. So I'm just wondering what they're thinking, what they're going to do with the situation. I mean, I'm sure that if a lot of companies withdraw their money and they relocate some of their workers or many of their workers, salaries will decrease because there are less job opportunities, right? I mean, there will be more competition for each available job. So overall, I do sense tense. I mean, they do seem to be tense and not very quiet.
All right. Have you seen a decrease in enrollment?
No. Overall, if you look at the academia today, there is a decrease. There was a lot of huge enrollment during the pandemic because usually when there is a crisis, people say, "Well, what am I going to do? So let's go study, right? Do something with my time." In my department, fortunately, there is stability, but overall, there is a decrease in enrollment, especially in departments that train people to work in the hospitality and tourism industry, and that's something that you can see on a global scale.
Right.
And also, professions like human resources, business administration in general. People are looking. I mean, if you look at today's generation, they're smarter. They want something practical. So I want a profession. So they usually go for engineering, law. And anything that has something to do with high tech,
right?
So because my department trains people to work in the high tech industry, so it's very attractive to them.
Makes sense. Oh man. Well, speaking of practical things in studies, we talked recently actually about false publications. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And we'll start with that.
Yeah, well, once you get your PhD and you want to get tenure, which means actually getting, a lifetime job, and nobody can really fire you unless you did something really, really bad. Mm-hmm. But in order to get this tenure, you need to publish, and publishing today has become very competitive. Look, when you write an article...
Was it not competitive before?
Well, it's more competitive now. Because the internet... Look, when you submit an article for publication, you're competing with all the world. You're competing with 1.2 billion Chinese and billions of 1 point something Indians, and it's very competitive. And out of 100 articles that are received by a journal, about 8 are published. And before it's published, it has to go through peer review, which means that there are anonymous professors that are commissioned by the editor-in-chief of a journal. And once they submit their recommendation, the editor-in-chief makes a decision whether to accept your article or to reject it, or usually it's accept with major revisions, if it's accepted. And it seems that there are a lot of journals, about 15,000 of them, that are predatory, which means that they work under the disguise of a real peer-reviewed journal. They invite you to submit articles, but they also want money. They say you need to pay $200 or $300 for publication. By the way, with real publications, you don't have to pay. There are two...
So that should be a red flag.
Exactly.
Right there.
Exactly. With real journals, there are two tracks. One is free, and the other one is open access. But you could choose. Open access means that anybody in the world can download your article. And if it's not open access, it means that only if somebody is a student, he or she will have access to the electronic databases of the university, and they'll be able to download your article. I usually don't choose this open access because I think it's too expensive, about $3,000. I don't think it's worth it.
Wait, you're paying for that?
Well, it's no,
because I think it was
don't
free.
pay. No. So if you choose the free track, which I usually choose, then you don't have to pay. But if you choose to have your article accessible to anybody in the world, whether they're a student or not,
that's paid.
Then you have to pay about $2,000 or $3,000, and that goes from your research fund. We all have research.
What
funds.
a racket!
Well, look, these publications, they have to make money somehow. If you choose the free track, then they make money from the subscriptions that universities pay.
Right.
So there are about 15,000 predatory journals, which means that they work under the disguise of a real journal. They invite you to submit publications, and you have no option. You have to pay $200 or $300. And they promise you a very quick review process. They say within 2 or 3 days we'll make a decision. And that's ridiculous. A real journal, it will take only the editor to look at your article and make a general decision as to whether he or she wants to move it on to the next stage. That will only take about a week. The quickest review process I ever went through was 4 or 5 months. In one case, it took me 2.5 years.
That seems normal. From what I've heard, that seems normal.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, though. Did you hear about the hoax papers?
Hoax papers?
Yeah.
No.
You've never heard about this?
No.
Peter Boghossian and I think Thomas Lindsay. I think is his name or something. Tom Lindsay, something like that.
Okay.
And Helen Pluckrose. God, I hope I didn't butcher any of those names. But these are 3 academics, intelligent people, from totally different fields and from all over the world. And they published, I think they got, in a span of a couple months, they got like 10 things accepted, 4 published, and basically they were all bullshit. All of them were bullshit, and the premise behind them was to test the academic journal's integrity, really.
Okay.
They said, like, we're going to publish our results. We're going to show people what it is that we did and what was published and what wasn't, and the research that they published was totally insane. It was women's studies and not that women's studies is insane.
It must have been one of these predatory journals. It couldn't be a real journal.
No, these were legitimate journals.
Really?
Yes, these were legitimate journals.
All right.
And I'll send you this later because it's wild. And the whole thing that happened was that when they got their edits back, it made their work crazier.
Okay.
Like, one of the things that they published was they took excerpts from Mein Kampf, and they substituted like Jews for women and men and white man and things like that, and it was published. That was accepted. I mean, really just. Really nuts.
Okay, well, you have to distinguish between. There are 4 different categories of journals. The Q1 are the top journals. Q2 are also okay, but then there are Q3 and Q4 journals, which are really low quality.
So what is all
if
this?
You publish,
what is the Q rating?
It's okay. So it means quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4.
Okay.
So the first 2 quarters, Q1 and Q2 are the best journals to publish in. And if you publish in them, you will get promotion. If you publish in Q3 or Q4 journals, it will not be recognized, and you will not get promotion based on them. So it probably was a Q4 journal because, again, it's low quality. It's not considered to be a very high quality journal.
It's low quality just because it was published later in the year.
No, it's not. Q1 doesn't mean quarter 1 of the year. It means it's
the
level,
like a quality. Okay,
yes, the quality, exactly. So Q4 was probably a journal that, the reviewers are probably fresh PhD students or people who are just... I'm
going to send this to you, and I'd love to hear back from you about what... Because they put everything online. They put everything that they... eventually they were caught out. And Peter Boghossian, who at the time was... in the philosophy department in Portland, I believe, was brought up on academic charges for falsifying data.
Oh my God.
And it was like, well, that was the point, that you guys didn't catch it. Like, that was the whole point. Now you're like taking it out on me because you didn't do your job. So it's like, basically a cover up.
Exactly. There are different reviewers. I mean, reviewers, there are some reviewers who are more serious and some who are a little bit more reckless. And that's why editors today, especially in, we're talking about top journals, they make sure they choose reviewers who are serious, those who have reputation in their fields, and that they know that they will give them serious feedback.
Right.
By the way, if you remember, we mentioned the predatory journals.
Yeah.
I would love to test this, but I'm sure that if I write an article, which will be complete BS, and I say that it's an experiment where I interviewed aliens and I compared the attitudes of aliens from Mars and Venus, I don't know. I'm not sure anybody will read it.
You think it'll pass?
I think so. They'll say, give us $200 and wow, it was great article.
I think that would be a great experiment right there.
Right?
I think you should do it. I mean, can you imagine like what people will say afterward? Like, that would be fantastic.
It's really a shame. I mean, these predatory journals, they take money from researchers, but they give you nothing in return. You cannot be promoted based on it.
Right.
And remember, I mentioned this earlier on, a real journal accepts, I don't know, maybe a year, 40, 50 articles. Predatory journal will accept and publish about 50 a month. Multiply that by $200 or $300, and you can see how much money they make off naive PhD students or fresh PhD graduates. It's really unfortunate.
That's so sad. Do you talk about this in the university?
Yes.
So how do people keep falling for this?
Well, I've only started talking to this with my students a couple of years ago. I'm not sure all lecturers do this, but we have a course called scientific writing or academic writing, and I make sure that the lecturers in my department make students aware of the fact that there are predatory journals and how to screen them out while searching Google Scholar.
How do you screen them out then? Like just by the sheer number of volume that they put out? Is that
no? Well, I did this with my students last Sunday. I just went to Google. I entered Google Scholar with them, and I typed in some keyword, and we looked at the results. And I told them, "Look, you see, this result is a result from a well-known publisher. So this is kosher. This is good. This one looks like something that has nothing to do with any publisher. Maybe some university. We're not sure." Screen it out. Because even if an article was published on the website of a university, it does not mean that it was peer-reviewed. Therefore, I do not use it in my references in my research. Whoa. Only if articles that were published in top well-known publishers' websites.
So what does that mean in terms of like gatekeeping too, though? Because that's kind of an issue, right? Like, because it could be a kosher website that maybe just doesn't look it by your standard. Because is that really the only way to just say, hey, the format's off, don't trust it, No,
well, I check things. I check it. First of all, I look at if they say something about how long the review process takes. If they say that it takes 2 or 3 days or a couple of weeks, that's a red flag. If they ask for money and you don't have a free track, that's a red flag. If they tell you that you need to submit by the end of the month and this will be published in a particular volume and issue of an article of a journal, that's a red flag. Because when you publish in a kosher journal, they don't know when it's going to be published.
Right.
They don't say, submit articles that will be published in this and that volume. So these are red flags. So if you see it, avoid it.
That's so wild. But how many people do you know who have fallen prey to this?
I suspect that a few of the people I know from different places in Israel have fallen victim to this, unfortunately.
Like people at the university that you work with, colleagues of yours, you think, as well?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's not only the way the website looks. Like I mentioned, there are lots of red flags.
Right.
But they also tend to mention all sorts of weird statistics that you will not see in a legit journal.
Weird.
For example, how many people visited the web page in general and in the last week, and from which countries.
Like, who cares?
All sorts of stuff that are presumably there to impress you, but in a legit journal, they're not going to be there.
Like, they're not trying to impress you. They don't care.
Yeah, and by the way, exactly. And by the way, there's another thing. Legit journals require that you submit through a submission window. Okay, it's a specific platform. If it's a predatory journal, they just say, email your manuscript to the editor. So anonymity is not guaranteed, and this is something that should be guaranteed. I mean, usually journals...
The anonymity of the researcher?
Yes, especially for the reviewers. The reviewers should not know. It's usually a double blind system.
Right.
It means that you don't know who the reviewer is, and the reviewer doesn't know who you are.
Right.
So it means that the assessment is purely professional, based on science.
Right.
And it's really concerning. There are 15,000 predatory journals out there.
15,000?
And I even heard stories where they take, every journal has to have an editorial board, which is actually the reviewers of the journal.
Right.
And I read about cases where they took the names of well-known, renowned professors and they just added them to the editorial board without their consent.
Ooh.
Just to look... rather prestigious.
How do you catch that, or you don't, really?
You can. Well, if you just Google a name, you can catch it. I can tell you that there is one journal that is using my name.
Really?
I've contacted them. I even threatened them that, I would go get a lawyer.
And did they take you down?
Nothing.
Nothing?
I did it several times. They just ignored me. I even sent an email to the editor through the email that they publish. That if you want to submit an article, submit it directly to the editor. No response. They couldn't care less. And there's really nothing you can do.
Do they use, false names, too? Am I a professor somewhere?
Could be. I haven't checked. Could be.
Oh, gosh. So, just so you guys know, if you see Professor Aaron Poris somewhere, run away. Run away.
No, because, they have to fill their editorial board with people. I mean, otherwise, nobody will fall into this trap.
That's so scary.
So either they put people who are, new PhDs who really don't understand the meaning of this, or it could be just they locate names and they just put them there.
Right.
So you should really, if you're a PhD student, don't waste your article. If you publish an article in a predatory journal, it's burned. You can't publish it anywhere else because it has been published.
Oh, wow. So that's years of your life down the drain, too.
Exactly. Because if I have an article that was published with a predatory journal, and now I submit it to a legit journal, they will run a scan of the internet. There are lots of programs. They use it. They want to make sure that you haven't copied. There's no plagiarism.
Right.
And if they find it, they couldn't care less where it was published, legit or not legit. They would say, your publication was published, and you're trying to publish it again, and they might even sanction you for 3 years.
Oh my God!
Exactly. If you're accused of plagiarism, you'll be sanctioned for 3 years.
Plagiarizing yourself, too.
Exactly.
Oh no.
Exactly. If I mention a study that I've published a few years ago, I have to say a study by Abraham 2018, for example. Otherwise, I'm copying things for myself, which is not legal.
Oh my God.
No, actually, it's not legal because it's considered plagiarism because once an article has been published, you give up your copyrights. So the copyright goes to the journal. So since it's not your article anymore, really, because you gave up your copyrights, you have to cite yourself.
Wow. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. But the idea that a journal that is false can burn you that way, that is so frustrating.
Burn you, and also take a few $100s from you. It's just unbelievable.
That's so crazy.
Yeah. But fortunately...
Do you know, like, Israeli publications that are false like that?
I'm not aware of that, no. But fortunately, there is a list. I think it's called Bell's predatory list of predatory journals. Anybody can find it online. And if you suspect that that the journal is predatory, you can just see
Look
whether
it up.
it's there. And if it's even suspected, avoid it.
Oh my god.
So if you look at the average predatory journal, if they publish 50 articles a month and they charge just $200, they make $10,000 off of you for nothing.
Off of nothing.
Nothing.
Off of fucking you over forever.
Exactly. By just putting your article on their website.
Oh no. I feel so bad too because that's like, how many people are cited on every paper. And that's it.
Regarding citations, in order to be promoted from assistant professor to associate professor, they don't only count the number of publications that you have, but also the number of citations.
Like how many people
cited
refer to you?
Yeah. And by the way, I remember publishing in my earlier days, trying to publish in a very prestigious journal. My article went through the review process, but one of the reviewers said, one of your references is not a very prestigious journal. So please replace it. So it means that professors who are aware of this, and I'm grateful that he or she pointed this out to me, do not allow or do not recommend publication if there is, low quality journals mentioned in your references. They ask you to replace them.
Wow.
So usually those predatory journals don't get many citations, although there are cases where they get many citations, again, because people are not aware of the fact that, the journal that they cited is not legit. And this really has significant impact on science, because, if a study was not peer-reviewed, who controls the rigidity? How do you know it was rigorous? How do you know that it was done according to the right, statistical analysis, etc.? So it really has negative impact on science, and I really hope that scientists are becoming more and more aware of this and do not publish anything there.
Well, I'm curious then. Like again, this kind of reminds me of the hoaxsters that I mentioned earlier, because now they're all on these press tours, basically on this diatribe against wokeism in the university and in academia. Just because they're talking about how these are they're self-citing basically, that they're publishing these ridiculous papers, and then they cite the ridiculous papers as proof that their concept is real, even though the academic rigor to publish the original citation is nonsense. So, and now you're telling me that this is happening not just on poor quality publications, but also. I'm sorry, not just on poor quality research, but on poor quality publications that really you cannot trust anything that they publish to begin with.
Yeah, I think the problem today is that the reviewers are professors. I review many articles from many journals, but today I basically do it only for the journals that I'm on the editorial board, because I just don't have enough time. And the thing is that many professors who review articles, they do it on a voluntary basis. They don't get paid for it.
Right.
And many times they do it because maybe their promotion depends on it. And that's why maybe they don't take it very seriously. I mean, they do it because they have to do it. And I think that and this is something that is being talked about. A possible solution might be that every prestigious journal hires a team of professors who are renowned and serious, and they would do the review. Because if you have a renowned professor in his or her field, he or she will be able to easily identify an article that was published in a low quality journal, or if the data that is presented in the literature review, for example, of the manuscript, was made up and not real. I mean, I'm so acquainted with my literature, with the body of research, which is consumer animosity, that any article that is being sent to me in the field, I can automatically say, well, this is kind of BS, and I point this out to the editor. There was an article that I recommended rejecting a couple of months ago because I suspected that the author or authors were not really acquainted with the literature. They wrote things that, not exactly accurate. So I don't know how many of, the scientific community, the reviewers in the scientific community are hired in cases where they are well acquainted with the body of literature. But I think it's important that you are a specialist in your field. And sometimes editors, they send out papers to reviewers who may not be exactly big experts in their field, but they send it to them because sometimes they just don't have choice. Because a lot of professors get invitations to review, but they reject the offer because it's time consuming.
Right.
But if they would get something in return, let's say they pay them something for the time that they've spent on reviewing, then that make it more attractive to review.
And more science will be done.
Exactly. I think editors need to take this in consideration. I think that they do know who the big experts are and send it to them. And again, give them some incentive to review. Because you can imagine that a big professor in his field, he or she will not spend an hour and a half, or 2 hours reviewing an article if it's really not worth it. It's not going to give them any promotion.
Also, and tenured professors, I'm assuming as well, maybe have less incentive to
Exactly.
And they're really the ones who you want
Exactly.
looking at stuff.
Exactly. And that's why...
So maybe we need to re-look tenure and how that works. Is that... I don't know.
Well, I can tell you that in my college, there is an indirect incentive to do review because at the end of every year, you need to indicate all your academic activities, which includes reviewing. And there are points for each activity that you do, including, by the way, giving interviews on radio and television. And you get points, and based on these points, if you accumulate enough points, you get some bonus. It could be 5% increase in your salary for the coming year, 10% increase in salary.
Right.
So I think this is a nice system because it doesn't synthesize. For example, for me, it does provide an incentive. Because I know that if I do some reviews and I do some television and I do some other academic stuff, I contribute to the community, this is something that will be rewarded by my institution. Right. So I'm not sure whether all institutions do this, but that's also one thing that the academia can do. But I think also journals need to do something because look, I think they make enough money. If somebody pays $2,000 or $3,000 in order to get the article published, I think that they could reward reviewers for their job, and not for the sake of for the sake of money, but for the sake of encouraging people to do a good job and to take it seriously. The review that they're doing
for nothing else.
Yeah.
I'm still reeling by this idea of these predatory journals. Because I see it online all the time, but not in academia because that's not the world that I'm in. So I see it like in art. I see a lot, I think an issue in the art world as well is that it's, you talked about how there's this free track. And in the art world, it's not exactly like that. It's very common for a publication or a gallery or a competition to ask you to pay money to submit your work.
Yeah.
And that I think is, it's a predatory system to begin with then.
Yeah.
Because you're in a situation where you really have no choice but to spend money. And, I don't know if you know many artists, but they don't make a lot of money on their art.
Yes.
And so the idea that, they need to pay all this money just to get somebody to look at it, it's kind of annoying. Which is why I think social media obviously helps, because it levels the playing field to a degree. But then you have all these ridiculous publications, and I get it all the time. I'll post something online and I'll get 5-10 different publications sending me messages saying, hey, send it to this. And then it's like, oh, and by the way, we have a reach of X, Y, and Z. Pay us this and we'll publish it. It's like, get out of here. You parasites. I hate you. But it's the fact that it's in academia is like really.
And by the way,
scary.
the predatory aspect doesn't start and end with journals. It also goes into conferences. I mean, a lot of organizations which say they're academic and they have some academic agenda, etc. They organize conferences, and they charge a lot of money. I happened to look for conferences in Europe in the summer, and I came across a few. What to me it seems like predatory conference organizers. They charge somewhere between $400 and $500
just to show up
for you to be able to present your paper. And they can enable dozens of people to publish. They organize. I mean to present. They organize. They rent a venue with a capacity for hundreds of people, so they can allow a few dozen researchers to present their work. So you can imagine how much money they can make just from one day of this conference. Now, I'm not saying that it's not legitimate to charge money to participate in a conference. A lot of legitimate universities do this, but the amount is unbelievable. The difference. I mean, to present in a legitimate conference could cost you $100, $200, but not $500. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So it looks like a multi-million-dollar industry. This predatory industry.
Maybe we're in the wrong business. We have too many scruples, really.
Yeah, and the thing is that usually researchers that participate in these conferences, the money comes from their research fund, which is actually government money. It's the public's money. So I think that universities should be aware. Maybe they should have a list of legitimate conferences, and only these conferences or participation in these conferences will be, financed or funded. Because otherwise, you're participating in a conference, but it's not legit. I mean, there were other researchers. You don't know how they did the research. You don't know who they are. Because if it's a legitimate conference, usually well-known professors come, and you can learn something from listening to other, presentations.
Worth going.
But if it's a fake conference, then it looks like it. It's not serious. The organization is not.
What are some of the red flags for a fake conference? We talked about these fake journals.
Usually, a real conference is organized by university. Mm-hmm. If it's not organized by a university or college, red flag. And the other thing is the amount.
Just that price point.
Just the price point, exactly. $400 or $500. That it doesn't sound. Look, usually university will charge you something because they need to organize the conference. It's to promote it, market. They offer you drinks, maybe lunch, etc. So it's legitimate. But charging $500, that's really. There's just no reason why you should pay so much money to present your work. So if you have to choose between presenting in such a conference or not presenting, you better not present it. Because again, I don't know how much it will help you in your promotion, because somebody looks at your CV and says, well, you've presented so much over the past few years, but what's this organization ABCDE? We don't know it. However, if you say, look, I've attended presentations or presented in a presentation, organized by this prestigious university or that well-known college, it looks different.
Wow. Gosh. Well, I'm getting towards the end of this. What's your favorite color? No, it's too late. Never mind.
Wow, that's a good question. I think blue, green.
Oh, that's good.
Have you used
some of those.
Okay.
And what do you guys think?
How do I look? I'm curious.
Well, so you know that show Alf that was on, I think, in the 80s?
Of course. I watched it a lot on Saturdays.
Well, then there you go.
All right, good.
Remember Alf.
I'm lucky to be taken, otherwise.
I have to say I don't always like the way these turn out, and I always tell people, like, if even I don't like it, I'll make you another one.
Okay. Should I go with a health warning label? I mean, can I get a heart attack if I see it, or
maybe? Oh yeah. Do you have
pass out or something?
Do you have like trigger warnings? Is that a thing in your classroom? Is that? No, I'm serious. Is that a thing? Is that on the campus here in Israel?
What?
Like trigger warnings and safe spaces and all these things, or is the academic is the level of people's ability to handle opposing ideas a little higher? What do you think of when I say these words? You know.
Well, I got to tell you, I mean, are you talking about politics specifically, or
no? I'm talking about on the college campus. There's like, I don't know if you know, in the states. In the states, there's a lot of push to create quote unquote safe environments, but to the best of what I can gather, it's like a safe environment from opposing and conflicting ideas, which is like the opposite of what a university is supposed to be.
Exactly. I think that today's students are critical thinkers. I mean, but you have to teach them, because many times, when I present facts, they say, well, it's not true because on that website I saw something else. I saw different stats. So I think that it's important to introduce to them to
journal, though.
Could be. Look, I tell them, look, when you look for data about, I teach consumer behavior about some, trends. Mm-hmm. I tell them, look, make sure that you get your data from legitimate, rigorous sources. Like, there are all sorts of websites like Statista. What else do we have? I forgot the name of that organization. 1 second, let me see if I come to mind. 1 second. Just with blackouts. Anyway, so there are all sorts of legitimate sources. But if, for example, you came across data published by in a blog, I mean, make sure that this blog is based on research, that it's not just somebody's opinion, because you can't rely base your research on everything, or base your the decisions you make on every little thing that you read on the internet. So
very true.
Yeah, so we try to make them critical thinkers, and I think this is my most important role. I don't think that my most important role is just to overload them with information, but help them become thinkers and to be able to use their brains. And I think this is something that the educational system doesn't do enough. I don't feel that in school they teach our kids to be independent thinkers.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned critical thinking, and that's a big one, which I think a lot of people don't. I think a lot of people misconceive what that is.
Yeah.
And it's it's not just coming up with an idea that might be novel or something that could usurp the way the way that people think. It's like taking things one step further. Like, okay, well, what happens next after that idea takes fold?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that if you look at many news websites that publish all sorts of findings related to cancer research, or research related to diabetes or smoking, many times they publish results which only hint to associations between factors, but not cause and effect relationship, but they're presented as if it's a cause and effect relationship. For example, if there's a research that says that research found a connection between smoking and mood. Okay, it doesn't mean that smoking does really affect your mood. Maybe there's some association. So maybe they took a sample of a few hundred people, and they asked them how often they smoke and what is their general mood. That they somehow measured their mood. So let's say there was a positive mood, but it doesn't mean that smoking increases your mood. I mean, there's no causal relationship. It just means there's association. Right. So I think that one of the things that we need to learn in society is that when we hear about research, we need to make sure that we're looking at just connection between variables and not cause and effect. Because I think this is one of the big things today that I look at newspapers. Because when you sometimes I speak to people and they say, well, I heard in the newspaper that if you eat this and that, this will make you thinner.
It might.
It might. There's an association maybe, but it doesn't mean that eating this food will necessarily make you thinner. In order to establish a cause and effect, you need to conduct an experiment. You need to feed people something, and then measure their weight after a certain period of time. But if you just ask people, you ask people, what is your weight today? And how often do you eat? It's just an association. It's not in a cause and effect relationship. So it's part of critical thinking, I think. And if you're able to understand this, then you will look at things differently and say, well, they suggest that there's a cause and effect here, maybe just to have more, just to clickbait, but it's not really it.
It's working.
And it's working, yeah.
I click on it.
Yeah.
I click on it all the time.
Look, when you talk about associations between things, I'll give you a crazy example. Okay, let's say that every time you wake up in the morning, you yawn, and birds start chirping. And it happens every day. Could you say that the fact that you have yawned has led the birds to chirp?
I will say.
Well, it's just an association. It just happened to happen at the same time.
Well, I mean, maybe when you yawn. When I yawn and the birds chirp.
Or maybe the fact that birds chirp led you to yawn.
Can I tell you? This is unrelated, but it makes me laugh. My wife got mad at me recently because we saw a crow come up to our porch, and I insisted on feeding it. And she's like, "No, because then they'll come back." And I said, "Good." And then I'll feed it more, and then it'll start to bring me stuff. Train the bird. She was very, very afraid of me training this bird in this way. But I don't know. I want them to be my friends.
So hopefully schools, I think it's a global phenomenon. I think that if schools don't just teach pupils how to pass exams, but just how to think, that would be great, because all the information they need is there on Google. Honestly, they don't need us lecturers or teachers. Everything is there. You just have to teach them how to be critical thinkers and pick out the information that is most reliable.
I completely agree. That's I think, it's sort of like what you were saying about predatory journals, though, in the end, is filtering out the good resources from the ones that are out to make a buck off of you.
Yeah. Because if you're not able to do that, you're basing your view of the world, your knowledge, on sort of fake news. Really. I mean, if it hasn't been peer-reviewed, as far as I'm concerned, it's fake news. Because I don't know whether it's rigorous. I don't know who reviewed this. How was data collected? Was it collected in a valid way, in a reliable way? How was it analyzed? All of these things can affect the results of the study.
I think you're a dying breed. Really. I know too many people who are just like, oh, well, that's fine. They take it.
Yeah?
Sure.
Well, I think we have to educate society. Because the more data that is available on the internet, the more we need to, to pick and choose.
Yeah, well.
Because anybody can write anything. There are a lot of platforms that allow anybody to become a writer. There's a platform, I don't want to mention the name. You can become a writer and you can write about anything. And you should take the information there with a grain of salt, unless you know that the writer is a well-known, professor in psychology or family relationships or whatever. Or you just take it as an opinion and you say, okay, well, it's an opinion.
Sure.
Not necessarily a general fact based on science.
That's not. Yeah, that's okay, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if you do the research in that way as well, where you can just say, this is what this publication says.
No, you just say based on a study conducted by, etc.
But doesn't that give legitimacy to that study? In a sense?
Yes, but again, I will not cite a journal that is not reputable.
You won't, but you just said that other people might do that, and that gives an air of legitimacy to that journal.
And that's why we as professors at the university, we have to make sure that our students are aware of this fact. My students weren't aware of this fact until I told them this. And because I would like to increase the awareness of, predatory journals, I instructed I have 3 lecturers who teach scientific writing, and I sat with them, and I tell them, look, this and that journal, this and that website is an example of something that has a red flag, so please make the students aware of the fact that they should cite it. This and that website is legitimate because of these and those green flags. Mm-hmm. So just increasing awareness can make the difference. I just think that there's not enough awareness.
Do you see this lack of awareness outside of the class, like in the professional field? Like if you go into do you do this kind of research when you go to the doctor and see this kind of scary quotation, I guess, I don't know, from a medical professional? Do you go to the doctor and he says, oh, well, you can do X, Y, and Z, and then you look it up later and say, oh, well, this guy's a quack?
No, honestly, no. But if we look at ourselves as patients, we generally do the work before we go to the clinic, right? We read about
for better or worse, because you hit WebMD and I have a sneeze and it's cancer.
Well, God forbid. But yeah, but I think today we're smarter patients. But again, many times we base the information we come to the doctor with, something we heard on TikTok. Mm-hmm. Which, with all due respect, I don't know who you heard it from. If it's from a doctor, then fine. But if it's just from a person who
TikTok MD,
yes, talking about his disease and his symptoms and the causes, then you have to take it with a grain of salt. So I think we should look at all these social media platforms more as entertainment rather as an authoritative source of information. And unfortunately, many people do take it too seriously.
Certainly, way too seriously.
And that's why I tell my daughter, who's a lot into TikTok, she's 15 years old. I tell her, listen, please, don't take everything you hear there seriously, please. I try to make her aware of this. Because, many times they can't tell the difference. They say, well, look, this guy said. I said, well, who is this guy?
Filter. You can't even trust the way these people look.
Oh, yes, definitely.
On TikTok.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, that's a scary world. TikTok.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
TikTok is a terrifying place, as far as I'm concerned.
And all social media has serious mental implications, on everybody, especially teenagers.
Mm-hmm. Especially teenage girls.
And I, to be honest with you, my daughter has an Instagram account. To tell you that I'm crazy about it, no, but I just can't prevent it. But when I'm with her, at least, I ask her, who are your friends? Who are you chatting with? Trying to make her aware of the fact that she should not, befriend anybody and she should be careful. A lot of maniacs out there.
Have you ever caught a catfish or somebody like that trying to get in contact with her?
No.
Oof.
No.
That's terrifying.
It is very terrifying. Very terrifying.
I have I have my 5-month-old, and I just am so scared of her falling into the hands of nonsense.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that bothers me today with the younger generation, the Z generation, is that they're too consumed with social media, and they refuse to read. And all their knowledge of the world is based on posts that they read. And I can see this. I could even see this among students. I can see that sometimes the general knowledge is quite superficial. And when I just ask, one of the things that I teach is English as a foreign language, and then I asked, I teach them reading skills. So I asked them, what is the difference between reading a book and reading an academic journal? And then I asked, okay, who read a book here recently or any time? In the best case scenario, one student will raise his hand or her hand.
Oh, wow.
Out of a class of 30.
Wow. That's scary.
It's sad.
I can't say I'm too much better. I try to read, but I don't.
But at least something, read the newspaper. They don't even do that.
Sure. Oh, yeah, no, I do
You
that.
just spend so much time on liking and sharing, and I think it's a waste of time. It really is.
I think I had a really great mentor in university. He wasn't a teacher, but he taught me a lot more than many other teachers. And something he said that sat with me was that it is a tool, and it is a useful tool if you're using it right.
Exactly.
So, like TikTok is probably fine. I mean, I don't know too much about TikTok because I'm not on it. But even Instagram or Facebook, for that matter, are fine when you're following the right things.
Exactly.
Because there are academic and really intelligent blogs and posters who are utilizing this media.
Absolutely. The same thing you can say about the internet in general.
Yeah.
If you use it for the right reasons, you can learn a lot. To be honest with you, I unfortunately don't find a lot of time to read books.
Yeah.
But I do read a lot of studies, and I read a lot of. I'm a lot into psychology because my field is actually consumer psychology. So there are a lot of websites that publish, like Psychology Today, which is it's a very good website because all of the writers are psychologists. Mm-hmm. So I do a lot of reading, and I think it's great. I mean, there's so many things that you can learn from the internet. I'll give you another example. Many years ago, I needed to build a conceptual model for my research. Without it, you can't publish. So I turned to one of the few professors then who was acquainted with a software that that can help you create these models. And I asked them, well, I need to create this model because I need to publish. So how much are you going to charge me? Look, this was back in 2013. All right, he said 5,000 shekels. Oof. I said, what? My whole research budget is just a little bit over that. I can't afford that. So what I did is I used blogs. I used YouTube. There are a lot of great YouTube channels that explain how to use different software.
Yeah.
And after 3 months of reading, trial and error, downloading the software myself, I was able to learn how to use the software. And I can tell you that with the help of the internet and nothing else, today I'm one of the few people in Israel who knows how to use the software. So I'm grateful for the internet. But of course, there's also, the dark web and all sorts of things. So if you use the technology for the right purposes, it can really improve your life, definitely.
Amen. And with that is a brand new pen. Doesn't work.
All right, I'm excited to see what came out.
Me too.
Well, you already know it came out.
No. That's what you think, but then last minute changes, and then I screwed up, and then it's over. I always forget to put in just a couple highlights here, and that's ruined it. Ruined it, of course. All right, fixed it. Okay. What do you think, Billy?
Wow. You're good.
Thank you.
Wow.
It's wet.
You're really good.
I appreciate that.
Unbelievable. You're really good.
Thank you so much.
What a talent.
Thank you so much. It was a great conversation.
Yes. I really enjoyed it.
Me too.
Thank you.
Thank you for the coffee and cookies.
Oh, sure.
Sugar added.
Sugar added. No health warning label.
No health warning labels. Oh, gosh. Check out Actually Serious with Aaron Poris, my special with Billy, by the way. It'll come out soon enough, and you'll hear all about those.